great. So, Ann, first of all, I want to thank you for coming on to our event today. And, you've been at a few of our events before, which is, it's always good to have you. And you do have a booth in the expo area today. So if anyone in the chat would like to go and check out our expo area and check out the Schooley Mitchell booth, I definitely encourage you to do so. Ann's got some stuff going on right now with deals regarding cost reduction. So I'm sure that's going to be relevant to any controllers attending today. So for some background, Ann Paloma is a CPA and CMA and is an expert in cost reduction and service optimization. She provides contingency-based consulting services for SMEs in the manufacturing and professional services industries, and she's achieved sustainable annual cost savings in multiple clients. Her savings average over 30%, ranging from 12% in waste and working services to 52% in telecom expense savings. So feel free to go more in detail about your background, Ann, but I'll leave you to it for now, so you can go ahead with your session. I will come on at the end to let people know what's coming up next. All right?
Okay. Thanks very much, Jesse.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. As Jesse mentioned, I'm Ann Paloma. I'm with Schooley Mitchell. It's one of the largest independent cost reduction consulting firms in North America. I'm happy to be at this event today. I've been to a few of these virtual conferences, and it's great to be able to network and meet different people and also hear different speakers. There's a couple of great topics that I'll definitely jump and join later on in our session today. But for Schooley Mitchell, we're exhibiting today as well. It's a great opportunity to talk to controllers, not just about our services, but about what we're seeing in cost reduction trends. Today, I'm focusing on waste management because it's an area that we've seen a lot of opportunity for savings with our clients. I'll go a little bit more into it as we go along, but cost reduction has been a big topic for our clients this year. Obviously, anywhere that you can tighten your belt, it leaves a little bit extra for your cash flow and for other business priorities. And that's what we do at Schooley Mitchell. We find those opportunities for our clients. A little bit more about me. As Jesse mentioned, I'm a CPA CMA. I worked for roughly 20 years in the CPG industry, mostly in financial planning and reporting. And when it was time for me to go independent, cost reduction was one of the areas that's a passion for me. And I was happy to find Schooley Mitchell because it started historically as an accounting firm. And that started looking at a cost reduction for the firm itself and then for its clients. And that became sort of the main cause of business for Schooley Mitchell. So interesting little fact there. So why waste management? We're going to talk about, why should people be looking at waste management? What does waste management mean? What's a definition, or at least a working definition, when you're trying to put your arms around that part of your business? What cost reduction challenges are there when you're starting looking at ways to save money? And I'll also do a case study on two of our clients. One is in food service industry. It's actually a deli and a restaurant. And the second client is a manufacturing client that's actually in construction supplies area of the business. So why waste management? So waste management, first of all, refers to collection, transport, treatment, and disposal of anything that is not of use or value to your main primary function. And it's interesting, one man's waste obviously is another man's treasure, but from the primary business point of view, if it's not the main output of your production, it's generally considered waste. Or byproduct, and cannot be valued as much as your main production line. Any activities or actions that are required to manage this byproduct from its creation to its final disposal can be considered waste management. And as you can imagine, depending on what production decisions you make upfront, you may be generating a lot or a little bit of waste. So that if you're looking at waste management holistically, it really starts from the creation of the waste and not just focused on the disposal of the waste. And for some businesses, it's just, you know what, it's part of doing business. I'm going to make this gadget and I'm going to create, this waste as a part of that process. And that's all it is to them. For other businesses, it's more of part of a CSR mandate. So that's part of their corporate social responsibility. And so they're thinking of waste management as a way that they can be socially responsible and minimize their footprint. I actually worked for an organization where measuring the volume of waste per production hour was actually a KPI for them. So waste can mean many things to many people. It can be little, it can be big, but it's really for most production businesses where you're not just offering a service. It's an element of your business. And if you think about it, even if you're in professional services, unless you're a solopreneur or a very small outfit, you're generating waste, even if it's just, from the coffee machine or paper from your office. So waste exists in all shapes and forms. So when we think about waste, there's really two elements that we consider. One is what is the nature of the waste itself, and the second is what are the specific business requirements around managing that waste. And when you talk about the nature of waste itself, it could be hazardous material. And hazardous material can be, chemical. We're talking acids, corrosive, something that, you got the skull and crossbones on, or it could be physical. And if you think of a medical facility, things such as needles or gloves can be considered hazardous material because of whatever they've been exposed to or whatever their risk is associated with disposing of it. So that's definitely something you want to consider in terms of waste management. Is it recyclable or not? So depends in some cases on what municipality you're in and what are the facilities that are available for recycling those facilities. I've been in businesses where waste is fully combined. There is no separation of waste because they don't have the facilities to separate them. Some cases, plastics is considered recyclable, sometimes it's not. So you really have to understand the definition of what is recyclable in the context of that business environment and the facilities available in that municipality. Is it compostable? So definitely there's been more focus on trying to generate waste that doesn't kind of hang around forever. So compostable waste is a high priority for most organizations, being able to do that separation. And the last point is whether the waste is compactable. And this is not something that we see a lot of, especially if you're in a low volume waste generating organization, but there's actually an opportunity for you to not just manage space, but also manage your cost based on being able to compact your waste. And that's why it's important to kind of understand the elements of waste, not just because it necessitates maybe different disposal activities, but also there may be ways to manage your cost relative to the type of waste that you're dealing with and generating. The second element we always consider is the business sort of environment around the waste itself. So what kind of quantity of waste are you generating? Volume in some cases is more important than the weight of the waste. Seasonality, are you in a business that generates more waste in the summer or generates more waste in the winter or has spikes and valleys? That's kind of important to know and manage. Physical space is also an issue, right? if you're in a large organization that generates waste, it's important to be able to manage the flow of the waste. That could impact such things as the frequency of your pickup, impact such things about how you lay out your operating floor so that you can maintain space for production as well as space for waste. And that's kind of important for some of our clients who are thinking about managing costs by having less frequent pickups. Well, do they have the waste, the space in their facilities to hang on to the waste while they're waiting for the next pickup? And that's where, such things about being able to compact your waste could actually be a bonus for you. Last point is security features. And this is not something we see a lot of, but in some cases, if your waste actually happens to have value, it might be important to have security around it, because you don't want people having access to the waste when you can actually generate revenue from the disposal of that waste. Or maybe something just as simple as making sure the waste is physically secure so that when the pickup comes, you're not dealing with extra charges around, somebody didn't throw the bag in properly, or maybe somebody went, dumpster diving and created a mess. You do get some costs and penalties associated to not being able to secure the waste for pickup. So those are things that we need to worry about when we're looking at kind of a client's business environment. I talked about the frequency of the waste, the size and the functionality of the disposal resources. You'll see later on in the food service case study, they actually had special disposal requirements. And so they needed a functionality to be able to manage that disposal. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more. So when we get into the cost around managing waste, you have to think about not just the disposal channel for the waste, but also the process and the business for collecting and separating the waste. So those are actually some internal costs that can be either higher or lower for the business, depending on how they generate waste and how they dispose of their waste. And that's something we need to worry about when we're looking at a client. I talked about being able to generate revenue from your waste. That's definitely something that's an option for clients these days. If it's worth it to somebody else to pick up that waste, it might be worth it for you to make sure that waste is available and secure and generate revenue from that activity. And in terms of business, the business itself, we talked about accommodating physical restrictions. Seasonal flexibility is also key in some industries, particularly construction supplies. And that's one of the examples in the case study that I'm going to talk about. And those are things we need to concern ourselves with when we're looking at either vendors or types of disposal processes that a company needs to consider. So let's talk about preparing the waste. So again, this is an internal cost for the organization. Like whenever you're disposing of waste, the point usually that a third party becomes involved is when it's, outside your door or at the end of the process when it's ready for disposal. But there are internal costs to the organization for preparing that waste. And one example that I talk about is different municipalities having different requirements means you may have to separate your waste as a particular requirement of where you're doing your business. But there's an internal cost to having that done as opposed to being in another municipality that doesn't require the waste to be separated. So you need to understand what those requirements are in the business and, maybe have an admin person or clerical staff make sure that they're doing that waste separation. The fees associated or the penalties associated with not separating could just be as simple as your waste not getting picked up and then you have an eyesore outside of your organization, or they could actually result in fines for an organization. So it's important that if you know that that's a requirement of where you're doing business, you make sure that you have the staffing do that, or the employee education to understand what the requirement is. So that way you're not facing fines and penalties. You're not facing the rework for having to resort that waste, or you're not facing the eyesore of not having that waste not picked up. So typically we don't want to get involved at this stage other than educating the clients and their staff of what the requirements are for where they're doing business. Now, the external cost of waste management, as I said, comes at the disposal. And, sometimes you have to worry about if there's a single vendor that can meet all your requirements. Sometimes you may have a specialized pickup. That means you have an extra vendor coming to pick up the non-hazardous waste, the actual hazardous waste. Sometimes you have to think of opportunities. So I worked in food manufacturing, food CPG companies, and scrap food could actually be a source of revenue because it could be sold off to feed farms instead of being picked up at compost. So there was an internal cost of maybe, separating that waste and keeping it for pickup, but the revenue generated could be worthwhile for the organization. And so you have to think about not just getting rid of the waste, but also getting rid of the waste properly if it's hazardous or has certain special requirements. And the third point is getting rid of the waste in a way that could generate income for your business. So those are ways to think of either reducing costs or offsetting costs on the disposal side of things. Physical restrictions. So again, what the driver is here for physical restrictions is really the frequency of your pickup. So, or in some case, the size of the bin that's being used for pickup. So if you're a large manufacturing organization generating a lot of waste, you may need regular pickup because you only have a small bin or space for a small bin. So that means, 2 pickups a week. If you're in a large industrial commercial space where there's enough space for a large size bin, you might pick up once a week or once bi-weekly. There's definitely an understanding of how much volume a client generates and their physical restrictions in order to say, okay, once a week pickup is okay, or no, you need more than that, bi-weekly, or you can manage with, every other week. Where it becomes a challenge is where there's seasonality. So if you're high volume in the summer because you're in construction supplies and that's where there's a lot of activity, you may have to worry about changing your bin size or changing your pickup requirements over that seasonality. And you then want to work with a vendor that's flexible, because if you're not, they may charge you extra for an additional pickup, or they may charge you extra every time you swap bins. So those are things that can drive up costs that, ordinarily maybe would not be part of your consideration when you're doing that initial negotiation with the vendor. So the way we work around that, for the most part, as I said, is making sure you're working with a vendor that is flexible. So if you need seasonal flexibility, you probably need a flexible vendor. And that means sometimes being upfront about your volume requirements, negotiating a fixed number of free extra pickups, making sure they'll waive the fees on upsizing or downsizing your bins. It may not sound like a lot, but I actually had a client where they ended up paying more on extra pickups than they did on their base rate. And so what looked like a good base rate on their waste management actually didn't work out so good once they factored in all the extra charges that the vendor was charging in. So understanding really, I would say at least a full year cycle of your waste and volume requirements will help with those kind of initial negotiations with the vendor. Okay, so let's talk about the case study. This is a food service client. They work in a strip mall, well-established history, I believe they were established somewhere in the late 50s, early 60s. So they have a good track record of how much waste they were generating. Their waste products include mixed garbage, and used cooking oil and grease. They didn't actually have any waste sorting requirements for recycling organics, just based on the city where they were based in. And this was one where they actually had to integrate a grease trap in the foundation of their kitchen, because there was actual value in the cooking oil and grease that they generated. So it wasn't just about capturing it and disposing it, but actually capturing it in a way that they could have a vendor come pick it up, refine it, and sell it for secondary use, so that they could actually generate revenue for the restaurant. It was worth it for them to invest in that grease trap in order to be able to generate that revenue. And it's not like it's huge amounts of revenue, but it really offset the cost of their waste management in that scenario. They were also dealing with limited physical space, both inside and outside the restaurant. So they were very concerned about the health and safety of their employees lifting heavy waste containers. So frequency of pickup was important for them. So they weren't accumulating a lot of waste, and they weren't kind of filling up their physical space or having to deal with heavy bags of garbage. So we looked at cost reduction profiles based on their existing vendor and one alternate vendor. They were actually pretty cost effective in the way they had set up their pickups, and they were restricted to their vendor options, but overall it really was a simple analysis exercise, because they didn't really have any hazardous waste. They weren't having a lot of material seasonality or volume fluctuations. So we were able to work with vendors that, didn't have to be overtly flexible, and could quote them a rate that they would manage over the year of their life cycle and accommodate any kind of special requests they had. And in this case, the vendor actually was, the client was very specific about having side access bins. So they didn't have to worry about their employees throwing garbage over the top of their bin, which was, not something you see a lot of clients worry about, but in this case, it was a requirement for them, and we were able to work with vendors to help them accommodate. So this was a relatively simple client scenario, but even then, the used oil and grease that they actually sold off and generated revenue is not something that you see on a regular basis. The last client I'll talk about, manufacturing client in construction supplies, 2 locations in Ontario. Their waste was limited to mixed garbage and recycling, and they had, their regular staff responsible for sorting the office and the warehouse waste. They didn't really have any special hazardous or specialized waste pickup requirements. What was challenging for this client was that they had an existing contractual obligation with a vendor. What was sort of surprising for this client is that they were not aware of their auto renewal clause or their termination fee. And not to say that the vendor didn't disclose it, but most likely it was in the fine print. It's not something that the client picked up on, I would say, when they signed this contract. And one of their issues with this vendor is they had a history of extra pickup fees that they had to pay to accommodate seasonal volume. So in construction supplies, they had higher volume in the summer, and this vendor was not flexible to that requirement. So they just ended up racking up extra fees whenever they were in that high volume window. So in this case, because the challenge was really about their contractual arrangement, it was just about finding a vendor that was flexible. So vendor that was flexible for their requirements. So the good news for this client was that they found a local vendor that was able to accommodate their upsizing of bins during the higher season at no extra cost. They had no hazardous waste consideration, so there wasn't anything to deal with there. I have a similar vendor that actually had glass that they had to dispose of, which was specialized waste. So in that case, we really had to deal with two vendors, one for their regular pickup and one for their glass pickup. But that's not a big stretch as long as you understand what the client requirements are and you understand the challenges of the waste itself and the business conditions. Really, that's all you need to understand to be able to manage the costs related to the waste management. Happy to answer any questions if there's any questions in the chat. That's really, the content I wanted to go through. It's really about understanding what the priority is for the business and what the underlying business process is. A lot of the times, just dealing with the waste disposal at the end of it is not enough. You have to understand what the client is doing to generate that waste and the kind of seasonalities and volumes that they're dealing with. If there's any questions, feel free to come on camera, put it in the chat. Waste management is one of the areas that we've seen a lot of cost savings for our clients. That's why I thought it would be a good topic to highlight. It's not a job that anybody usually spends a lot of time on, and so maybe it's not clear that there's opportunities there. But it's really been, I would say, rewarding to be able to help clients in that area. So thank you everyone for joining me today. Hope to see you in some of the other sessions.
Hi, Ann. To our chat, I'm Jessie from the TorontoJobs.ca events team, and I just wanted to come on and say thank you for the presentation. It's always a pleasure to have you on our events. And I did want to say, definitely some really great insights, I think, for all attendees today. The fact that waste management is not really something that people tend to spend a lot of time on is definitely true. Or maybe not think about that much. So, it's good to have people like Ann who actually do think about this stuff. So I did just want to say as well, Ann does have a booth in the expo today, so I would go and check it out. And, I know, Ann, that there are services right now that you're focusing on.
Yes, we recently launched cost reduction in utilities. So anything to do with hydro, gas, propane, electricity, water. There's an opportunity there which Ontario's businesses may not be aware of, and being a deregulated market, we can help them go through that and look for savings opportunities there as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think that's definitely something that a lot of business owners and controllers would be interested in. So definitely go and check it out. It's going to be in the expo area on your left. Ann, again, thanks for coming on today, and everyone in the chat, thank you so much for joining us today. Right now we have two other sessions coming up. One is by Laura Vaughn, which is going to be on the change leader is her topic. And then we've also got a session by Emmy Rousseau on practical ways to reduce stress and be less overwhelmed. So, yeah, you become more overwhelmed.
No, less. Less is more in that case.
Exactly. So I will, and I will let you go for now. But feel free to stick around if you've got anyone who's asking questions, and I would also send your social media links in the chat here so people can easily access them. Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
I would love to join a couple of other sessions, but if anyone has any questions, I'll stay on for a few minutes.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks so much, Ann, and you have a great afternoon. Okay.
You too.
All right.
Bye, Jessie.
Bye-bye.